Welcome to the video where I ruined Pixel Gun 3D for you forever, as if the game hasn't already been ruined with microtransactions. You're welcome. In all seriousness, I know that Pixel Gun 3D has fallen off in the past year, but the game's brilliance is still unforgettable. I vividly recall playing the campaign whenever I was younger and how utterly terrified I was. The game has always had the power to be genuinely terrifying at times, so why don't you sit back and find out how Pixel Gun 3D, an FPS of all things, is one of, if not the best survival horror games on the App Store. The story of Pixel Gun 3D follows a person named Pixelman through his experience of a zombie apocalypse and his quest to fix his world. Yes, I know, super creative. The story is split up into worlds, with each world having a different sort of setting and set of levels. Each place that you end up killing monsters in reflects and sort of parodies a certain part of the horror genre at the time. For example, The Hospital. The Hospital is a parody of all horror titles and experiences that seem to copy and set their main spooks in, well, a hospital. However, Pixel Gun 3D somehow manages to do the impossible by actually making this setting scary. Even though I'll talk about the settings later, I have to address the fact that the environments are perfectly detailed to supplement the story. The places you go to actually feel like they're ravaged by the undead. If we are focusing on the actual journey of Pixelman, we see that the story starts on the main character's farm, where he finds clues on where to advance next to try to find someone that can actually reverse this apocalypse. The places in question in this specific world, however, are all reflective of what the horror games were popular at the time. As I said before, this is like Slender Man or Area 51 horror, or as Pixel Gun 3D says, Area 52, or even an apocalypse at a school. The second world strays a little bit away from the horror that the first world had, but still, the levels are pretty uncanny. Even in the first world, I need to say that each level feels very isolated and lonely. The game feels, just like most Resident Evil titles, that you are the last person left. Even if you find someone, they will die or leave you. You are the only one capable of defending yourself. In no point in the story do you find anyone that can actually help you in combat. You do find other characters throughout the campaign, but they only serve to move the plot forward rather than actually functioning as helpers. Hell, quite literally, even some of the characters and humans try to hunt you down. To give a summary of the second world, basically this Pixelman tries to find his way to the Ender Dragon knockoff with some girl that he met at the end of the first world in the apocalyptic school. This world focuses mainly on traveling through fantasy-like worlds, like literally hell or some Antarctica place, to find your destination and force the dragon to rid the world of the zombie apocalypse. The story has officially stopped being grounded in what could actually happen in reality, whatever that limit is, and now has become a sci-fi adventure story. But that uncanny feeling of isolation combined with the eerie yet captivating ambience still makes these locations creepy. The entire story so far has been outlandish, but you have to remember, a game can be outlandish while still being creepy. Just take a look at Resident Evil. The Resident Evil franchise is one that is full of weird, wacky crap, like the Lickers and the entirety of Resident Evil 4. The games, however, are still very, very scary. At least some of them are. Pixel Gun 3D just adopts a more toned down PG-13 version of this horror. Anyways, the rest of World 3 follows that your character journeys back to Earth after fighting aliens, and he finds out that he needs to fix the fact that his entire world is a blocky. Imagine coming to the realization that your world is corrupted. Imagine finding out that your world is simply a video game because you keep playing video games and you won't stop. Yeah, that's truly terrifying, especially for some Discord mods. The last level is honestly my favorite as you fight the gamified versions, well, quote-unquote gamified, more like pixelated even though the game is pixelated. Let's get back on track. As you fight the gamified versions of the hardest bosses that you've encountered in the game thus far. The game outright shows you that the bosses, the extremely difficult to kill characters from the last few levels, are just common enemies at this point and aren't even the boss of the level. The boss of this level will be unparalleled in power. Indeed, this boss is powerful because you can never truly beat it. You'll always lose against this boss, even if you win. The boss, after you shoot it enough times, traps you in the code, an even worse realization than having your world be pixelated. in the end, the boss never truly loses, even in the fourth world. The fourth world is where the horror really creeps back in. I again won't go into too much detail about the story, but I will say that the fourth world revolves around the concept that while the Pixel Man is trying to escape, he is stuck in a loop in an actual virtual video game. All his efforts through the last few campaigns were fruitless. He may have solved the problem of the apocalypse, but his world still remains disfigured. He's now stuck in an endless loop without a means of escape. The real horror seeps in when you realize that the multiplayer you play throughout Pixel 3D has evidence that the game you are playing in takes place in the campaign. There are Easter eggs relating to the girl from the second and third world after you find her in the school, that she is dead and is haunting some of the maps, like Parkour City 3032, a map that isn't currently available because the devs suck, but it has an Easter egg in the TVs that show that Pixel Man is still haunting the technology, trying to escape. I'll show the Easter egg on screen now. It was difficult for me to find, but I did get it myself. This picture is from a video because I don't have the picture anymore because Pixel removed the map, as I said earlier. Let's continue. Basically, he is now just a ghost of the past, like everything else. The senseless violence will never cease, and the pixelation of the world will never be fixed, especially since the devs won't continue the campaign. Because why should they? Why should they continue a loved campaign? You know, I'm gonna stop pooping on the devs right now. Okay, I'll stop. After over a decade, the story of Pixel 3D isn't finished, nor probably will finish, at least anytime soon, because of the devs, and this cycle of misery for Pixel Man just truly highlights the terror of Pixel 3D. It shows that the devs are continually making this main character suffer, and that they won't let him get out of this painful loop, while everyone ignores him for the rest of existence. I believe that the setting of Pixel 3D is by far the best and most terrifying aspect of the campaign. If you just look at these screenshots of the Silent School, you can see how the game is really pushing the age limit. There's literally blood everywhere, skinned alive children, and a cellar full of cadavers. Blood everywhere, skinned alive children, and a cellar full of corpses? Yep, this is basically just a typical day at school, especially an American one. Honestly, there is a lot of attention to detail too. Whenever a map is trying to set a mood, usually the visuals and soundtrack really make that happen. Even if the visuals are lackluster, you can expect the soundtrack to make up. Just like the first level of the second world. Just listen to this. I would legitimately listen to this even when I'm not playing to the game. What makes these settings so effective in delivering horror is the way they tap into universal fears, abandonment, darkness, and the unknown. The Silent School, for instance, again, doesn't just feel empty, it feels haunted by the memories of what once was, with every flickering light and distant echo suggesting that something malevolent is just out of sight. The bloodstains and skinned figures aren't grotesque details, they tell a story of the place where innocence was lost in the most horrific way possible. The attention to detail doesn't just stop at visuals and sound. The interactive elements, like the ice cream machine in the city, that actually plays the song if you go near it, and then the hidden traps throughout most of the levels, make these settings not just places to traverse, but places to survive. You're not just passing through these areas, you are navigating them, and the game makes sure that every step feels like it could be your last. In conclusion for this section, the setting of Pixel 3D is not just a backdrop for action, it's an integral part of the horror experience. It's a world that feels alive in the worst way possible, constantly reminding you that you are in Pixel 3D, and that you are never really safe. Now, let's talk about one of the most critical elements in any horror game, the enemies. In Pixel 3D, the enemies are not just obstacles to overcome, they are the very embodiment of fear and tension. From the moment you encounter your first enemy, the game makes it clear that this isn't going to be an easy ride. The enemies in Pixel 3D are designed to be more than just mindless creatures. These guys aren't just there to ruin your day, they're there to ruin your week, and maybe your sleep schedule. Each one is crafted with unique characteristics that challenge you in different ways. For example, take the ghostly figures in Silent School. These aren't your typical enemies. Some spit acid at you, and some are skinned alive small schoolchildren, keeping you constantly on edge. Their design, with their bloody and disfigured forms, taps into primal fears of the unknown and the supernatural. The game also bases these enemies off of creepypastas at the time. The biggest example of this is Slenderman, making these enemies probably some of the scariest of the day. What really sets Pixel Gun 3D apart, though, is how these enemies interact with the environment. They're not confined to predictable patterns. They can stalk you through corridors, ambush you from the shadows, or force you into tense claustrophobic battles where every bullet counts. Sometimes. The game doesn't just throw enemies at you, it makes you feel hunted, like these creatures are actively trying to outsmart you. But you also feel like the hunter. Even though you are severely outnumbered in every encounter, you still kill all these monsters. In fact, to progress, you have to kill all of them. After basically becoming the Doomslayer, you have to hunt down every last zombie to reach the boss, and take down that grotesque foe. The enemy design also reflects the game's overall theme of horror, whether it's the devils that come to life in literal hell, or the nightmare swamp monsters outside the castle. Each enemy feels like a manifestation of a specific fear or phobia, designed to keep you on edge. And just when you think you've seen it all, the game introduces a new type of enemy that challenges your expectations and forces you to adapt. In Pixel Gun 3D, the enemies aren't just there to be defeated, they're there to haunt you, to remind you that you are never truly safe. Every encounter is a test of your nerves and your skill, and the game makes sure that you feel the fear with every step you take. So, is PG3D really a horror game? After breaking down the setting, enemies, and sound design, it's hard to argue that it isn't. The game masterfully combines these elements to create an experience that's not just about surviving, it's about feeling the fear, tension, dread with every step you take. The haunting environments, terrifying enemies, and spine-chilling sound design all come together to make Pixel Gun 3D more than just an action-packed shooter. It's a game that, at its core, understands what makes horror truly effective. Whether you're exploring the eerie halls of Silent School or fighting off grotesque creatures in an abandoned hospital, the game never lets you forget that danger's always lurking just around the corner. In the end, Pixel Gun 3D is not just a horror game in disguise. It's a horror game that excels at what it does, even if not immediately obvious. The layers of fear it builds are subtle but powerful, and that's what makes it really stand out. If you haven't seen Pixel Gun 3D as a horror game before, maybe it's time to take another look, and you might find yourself more terrified than you expected. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the horrors of Pixel Gun 3D, which is a mobile multiplayer FPS, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay safe out there. Bye bye.